Hi all, Sam here, Really Love Guitars, and we've got Ian's Taylor 214 CE in for a service, and it's another in a long line of Taylors which I seem to be doing a lot of, which is fine. I mean, no problem at all. So one of the things I've been trying to do while doing Taylors is keep a record, keep track of how the adjustments how they work, or the kinds of adjustments that come with any particular change of the shim. So for those who don't know, Taylor's guitars come with a bolt-on neck and a paired shim system, and it's really clever. I'll just show you a sort of a view of it. I think it's a darn good thing in that Taylor recognizes that their guitars are gonna fold up a bit over time. So you have the body here, like so, and then you have let's do it like, how should we do it? Let's do it like this. You have a shim, badly drawn shim, comes like that, and actually goes a little bit below the line on this part here, hard to show. And then you have a shim that goes down here and comes up like so, and then comes out the top here like so. Anyway, it's kind of difficult to show, but what it means is that your guitar, basically your extension sits at a certain angle, your fingerboard, as does your neck heel. And that system with the two bolts, or three bolts, right? One there, and one up into the extension. Those three bolts hold the guitar neck on, and the degree of thickness at this end and at this end, or lack of thickness, tilts the neck either more this way or more that way, if you see what I mean. But they're always reciprocal, so if you are increasing the push this way, then what happens is your neck goes higher like that. Does that make sense? Or yeah, or if you increase it that way, your neck goes down because you're pushing the heel out this way. So basically, as the numbers go up on with the heel shim, the numbers increase. As the number increases, you get more of a tilt that way. Numbers decrease, it's more back into neutral there. So it's a brilliant system because it allows players to readjust their neck or reset their neck periodically without having to tear off the glue and rip apart a glue joint and then plane and chisel the angles here and sort of hope that they are kind of reciprocal. This shim system is very precisely done so that first and foremost the shim pairs are always reciprocal, and so you never run the risk of bending the extension because you've got a certain sort of tilt here but not enough there, in which case if you're screwing it together it'll pull this down and you'll create a hump. That doesn't happen. The Taylor system is such that you have to have there's always 6. The extension is always 6 less than the heel, so you work out whatever heel you need and then find they come in pairs, but you find a pair. Now I've already done the sort of finding out work here on Ian's guitar. So it came with an 8 shim in the heel and a 2, so there's the difference of 6 there. So 8 minus 6 is 2, and it turns out that the correct replacement on this one was 18 to, what's that, 12. Okay, 18 and 12. Again, 6 difference, so I know they're the reciprocal pair. And what they've done is they've tilted the fingerboard up towards the strings, or up in relation to the bridge. And so we've got a really low playing action. Oops, there's I suppose I've got to blur that out, haven't I? Do I know how to do this in video? Oh well, it will teach me, won't it? Sorry, Ian. Maybe I'll zoom that in so you can't see that bit. Foolish me. Anyway, just one second. I'll try and make this easier for my editing later on. Not sure that will make it any easier. Let's just put that over there. Ta-da! So interestingly, I don't have a formula yet, and actually Taylor hasn't given me one to work out what I need. But I'm working out a formula myself, basically, to work, based on the recent ones I've done. And so what I can tell here is that the 10 difference, the plus 10 on the heel on this guitar, gave me a 9mm reduction at the last fret. Now, it's a little bit more difficult because Taylor likes to work in 12 fret actions, you see. So when I record the information about these guitars, I have to record them at 12th fret, high and low E, and then I also, for my own benefit, I also work at the last frets because that's what I refer to. So we can see here that the action has gone down substantially, or I've targeted it from 2.25 on the high E at the last fret. I've taken it down to 1.3, which is really low, and 3.1 down to 2.25. Now my target is normally 2.25 on the bass and 1.5 on the high, on the treble side. So I'm just a little bit under, and I'm going to leave it that way rather than cut back the saddle. So I'm happy with that. That's in the area or in the zone I like. So I've already done the changing over of the shims. So really what I have to do next with this guitar is to change the saddle, the nut. The saddle is a full-size one, so I'm not going to do anything with that. I'm going to change the nut and put a tusk one on, and basically wait for some strings to arrive in the post. So this is not a very satisfying setup, but I thought that while I'm at it, just for those of you who are interested in the Taylor neck system, I'll show you as well as I can. I wonder if I can show you with mirrors and anything. I've got a mirror here. Let's see if between my phone and this mirror thing we can see anything inside there that you might find enlightening. Now, each Taylor like this comes with a sticker over the neck bolts, which has to come off, so it doesn't look particularly tidy because I had to remove that. But I think what I'll do is let's start with doing the nut part of it right now. Then once that's done, I'll take the strings right off. We'll look into the neck pocket, into the body of the guitar. We'll take the have I brought my tools back home? I better have done. Yes, I did. I put them down there. Yeah, we'll take the neck off then and look at the way the neck joint works. So we'll stick with the nut for the time being. So what I have got here is I've got a nut that's currently working nicely, but we're going to change it out for a tusk one, which is just slightly better. And some people will say, but why do you need to? You know, they put a new bone nut on there, and well, I need to only insofar as customers ask me to, do the full thing. And the full thing is we reset the neck with the shims. I make any final tweaking adjustments with the saddle if required, but they are only very minor. And then if the saddle has been already lowered, I hate these strings that do that. That's naffed up. I'm going to have to find the last one I did exactly the same. Undoing it, it broke in exactly the same time, same place, and I had to find myself an electric guitar string to do the rest of it. Why does it do that? It's like as if it's trapped or something and it has to break. It can't undo. What? This is the second time Taylor's done that to me. Why have they tied it round in some sort of way on the high E that I don't know about? Beginning to think they might do, So now I've got to find me a replacement temporary string, which I don't really have a lot of spares kicking around. So let's see what we're at in the gauge of this. So we're looking at 12s. So I'll probably find a 12 somewhere, because that's history. Even if it's just slightly off, I only really need it for doing the nut. But it's infuriating when that happens, because, yeah, you can absolutely do without it. So, what did I say, 12? Let's see what we got in here. Anything spare? Probably not. 13. 13 will do. It's a spare. Okay, it's going to do. Not perfect, but it'll do. Let's just put it on. Sorry about this. Yes, so we will. That's just so blasted annoying. I think I'll just leave that off to the side for a minute. Okay, so we're going to do a combination of tapping one way and tapping another to just move this nut out. Yeah, so it, you know, the new bone is not a bad material, but the tusk is that little bit better. Now this could be an extremely tight fit, so I'm going to get these strings out of the way. Let's see if this will cooperate with me by tapping it downwards here. So I need to get me a suitable thing to drift with. There we go. Same. Get that string out of the way. So I'm going to support the neck right here. I've got the body under my arm, and I'm going to just now tap down. That's pretty tight, but it is moving very, very slightly. Feel it coming out there. So shall come out, but just needs some careful drifting. There we go. Lovely. Take those out of the way. So it is a very, very tightly fitted nut. So tightly fitted. So the first thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to measure this so that we have a record of what I'm aiming for. Let's wipe the board again. Yes. So anyway, yeah. So it's not a complete setup because I don't have the strings and so on. But we'll get most of it done, and then I'll move on to working on another guitar. Yeah, so I'm just, it's been very interesting to see, you know, how the shim system on the Taylor works. I've been trying to figure out the rate at which these 488, 490, let's call it 490. Yeah, figure out the rate at which the guitars deform over time. What do we call it? 490. Because you know when you know that, you've got a sort of an idea. Now it can't be. It'll be different for one guitar one place and another guitar somewhere else. So it's very hard to, you know, say this guitar will deform at a given rate. There's a lot of discussion around what causes the rising of actions, and some people blame it on. You know, the humidity is the answer to for some people to everything. We've got 43, and we've got 43. So this 1720 could be practically a drop in. It'll just be a fraction too wide at the moment. Yeah. So there's a lot of claims that, you know, you watch different people, and different people have different ideas. That some people say that humidity causes all the problems. Other people, perhaps more in my line of thinking, blame the rising action on these guitars on the force of the strings pulling 24/7, 365 days a year. So very difficult to know. What I do know is that they all change over. They almost all change over time. They seem to almost all change over time. As a result, I constantly have customers saying they're Taylor, beautiful guitar and all that, but it's not playing at an action that they like, or it's too difficult to play, and so on. So it's very, very common, even though Taylor, likes to say that it sets its guitars up with a beautiful low action. It's never perfectly ideal for most of my customers, and it's hard to say what if my customers have things in common, but a lot of them are older players. Some of them have weaker hands, or some wrist strength issues and so on. So whatever those kind of different experiences are, it's very true that most of my customers come asking for a much lower action than they've got. And of course, with this shim bolt-on neck and shim system, I'm able to do that for them. Even though when I first started requesting the shims off Taylor, Taylor's reply was, that's way below, that action is way below the Taylor specified action. And I have now put in a paragraph in my emails which says, I understand that this is considerably below Taylor's specified settings, but my customers have particular requirements, and hope that they understand that that's the case. And when I give these guitars to people, once I've done this low action, they're very, very happy with them. So and they play beautifully. There's some people will make out that there's it causes a terrible problem in playing. It isn't the case. They play beautifully well. And to Taylor's credit, the underlying fretwork is always good enough to go down to that kind of action that I pointed out without requiring fret leveling, which of course is not the case when you come to electric guitars, which always need some fret leveling to play at typically target electric guitar actions. Anyway, so the sort of standard Taylor always comes to me to be lowered. Now, it could be that there are Taylors out there which are either set beautifully low to begin with, or whose action just happens to perfectly suit the owner, and that's fantastic. I have no gripes about that. If that's the case, then everybody's happy, and by definition I wouldn't necessarily see those guitars, because they come to me when people want the action reducing, which is what they tend to mean by setting up. So there's a kind of inherent evidence bias for me in that everything I see is coming from people who want the action reduced. But nonetheless, I still see a lot of very new guitars with quite high playing action, which I would want to change, and the customers certainly do. And then my interest is, once I've made that adjustment for them, what is left for them in future? What adjustments are possible in future? And that depends on what the shims are that we use in any particular situation. So if we take this one, for example, well, let's start with a fact that we can't get away from, and that is Taylor's shim pairs, or let's just concentrate on the heel shim, because that's the one that we sort of consider when we're talking about changing the alignment of the neck. So the heel shim numbers go from minus, oh, do you know what? Let's see, it's over here, isn't it? Minus, oh, I see, okay. These don't go as far. It could be, well, this says it goes from minus 18, sorry, on the heel goes minus 12. It's the last one on this list, but and then it says that the top one is 18. But I know there's a 30, for example, and I've used a 30 in the past. So let's assume that it's 30. Since we're always going in the lowering direction most of the time, let's start with the fact that we want numbers that go from 0 to something, and let's say 0 to 30 is the highest. 30 is the highest we get. Okay, so let's drop that in. That's nice and fitted. Too tall, but that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to measure up compared to the original one. Nice fitting. Yeah, so plus 30 is the highest amount of heel shimming we can do. And let's have a quick measure. And so when we take this guitar, for example, so I'm doing two things and not thinking. So when I did this guitar is, I can't remember, is it pretty new? Yes, it is pretty new. In fact, Ian bought this and got the free Baby Taylor offer, so it's a very recent offer. So this is brand new, and it's not at the desired action, but it's not a million miles off. So we've taken the original 8 and 2 shim, but let's concentrate on the 8. We've taken the 8 shim out and replaced it with an 18, which has got me to a super low action here. So if you think about it, if the range is 0 to 30 and it goes up in 2s on the heel extension, we've gone past halfway already. So there's the same again. So if that plus 10 adjustment, we've got another plus 12 left before we get to 30, which is the maximum shim. So let's say our plus 10 increments was equivalent of 0.9 mils. Let's say that the remaining 12 increments that we've got on the heel shim number, let's call it equivalent to 1 millimeter at the last fret, which is approximately 1.4 at the saddle. We don't really care about what it is at the saddle, but if we go at the last fret, if we want reduce the action there, we know that 1 millimeter reduction there is the same as 1.4, and we also know that it's bought for us by 12 positive steps in the shim department. So I guess what I'm saying is that from this point onwards, from new, there is only the possibility of a 1 millimeter action reduction in future over the last fret. So that's in terms that I understand and that are familiar to me. So many people, I've had plenty of guitars come in here quite often. So let's draw it up just here. We know the actual action here is, what did we say it was? 2.25. So this gap here is, we now set at 2.25. Okay, if we've got another 1 millimeter of adjustment in future by using the final 12 plus 12 increments available to us, we can allow this to go up to an action of 3.25, and then we can apply this reduction by using the 30 shim, heel shim, and then it will take us back down to 2.25. Once we've got that done, who knows how long that might take, and that's the bit I can't tell you, but once that's done, then ever after that, this action will be rising at whatever rate it rises at. Now, I've had guitars in where Taylor's in where the action here started out as 3.5, sometimes as much as 4.5 at the highest, I seem to remember. So that just tells you that they've got to that point, and let's say it rose in the next 10 years to a similar 3.5. Like I say, we've got 1 millimeter, we could take it back to 2.5 at the last fret as I measure it. But then again, once that major adjustment is done, you're on your own after that. It's rising and there's no further adjustments. I did talk to Taylor about this and asked them whether or not they would consider creating a shim value greater than 30 to cover more years of the guitar's life. And Susanna, the rep in Amsterdam, was very helpful, and she said, well, if you ever found it needing to do that, and it's still under its 12-year warranty, send it back to them and they will rework the faces to reset the shims, basically. So you can't say fairer than that. Obviously, you don't, if you love your guitar, you don't want to be without it for a month, 6 weeks, or whatever it takes, even though it's great that they're going to do that for you. But most people would want to be able to do this sort of adjustment with their guitar tech. So anyhow, that's a long, drawn out whole thing. So what I'm just going to do here is I'm going to measure my original nut distances. So I get this reset to 0. I need a new one of these darn things. Right. So what I tend to measure is I measure the treble, put the thing in the treble slot as far as it will go. We've got 706. So I'm going to draw it out up here first, because this is the one we're starting with. So 706 on the treble side, and then on the bass side where the thingy does fit in, so it's usually a bit lower because the calipers fit into the slot, we get 673, I mean. That can be significant, 673. So those are the heights that I want to get close to this. Now what I'll do is I'll check what this one is currently. So we've got 982. We've got 982, and we've got on this side we've got 919, 919. Okay, so now if I do a quick calculation, I probably ought to better use my phone for this, because it's pretty depressing to get it wrong straight off. Let's have a go. Calculator, where's it gone? Utilities, where have they gone? Calculator, right. So 919 minus 673, 9.19 minus 6.73. I started with minus 919. 91.19 minus 6.73. Equals 246 oversized there on the bass side. On the treble side we've got 982 minus 706, and we're 276 over on that side, so not that far off, 30.3 of a mil difference. Okay, so now what we can do is, the idea is we want to get this down to as close to the correct size before I fit it in there. We can fine tune it, might be good to fine tune it with the nut files, but let's get as close as we can get. So I know on the treble side I'm going to take off 276, so I'm literally going to mark this up at 270. Actually I'll go to 266, I'm going to go 0.1 under. What I do here is, with it locked off, I'm going to scrape myself a line, a notch on the edge of the nut, and I'll just sort of mark it up there, make sure I get a bit of pencil grit in it. Then I'm going to measure the 246 on the other side. In this case I'm going to call it 236, give myself a little leeway, and that 236 gets marked on this end. Well, you can just distant view, you get the idea. So I'm kind of scratching this down on the end of the nut. Then I'm going to get myself a blade and a straight edge, another straight edge, and a bit of support as well, which is now the same thickness. And what I'm going to do, if I've got eyeballs to do it with, is I'm going to line up each of these marks. If I can hold it steady. It's a bit difficult to grip. This thing wants to move around. It's not easy. I see that. I wonder if it will hold better in there. Maybe it will. I think it will. Okay, so the idea is I'm going to just line up these notches with my little 1.1 or 1/10 of a millimeter leeway either side, and now I'm going to cut a gouge down there. Now that little bit of work there has given me a clear line. See that? That now tells me how much I've got to remove to get to a similar size, or very close to that size. Still a tiny fraction above, but you can see it's actually quite a lot of material to take off. So I'm going to do some of it with a sanding thingy. What's the word I'm looking for? Block. But I'm also going to do some of it with a Dremel or that thing, bobbin sander. Is that what they call it? Oscillating sander, up and down thing. So there's my guitar hung out the way. I'm going to go across. You can see me from the top camera. I'm going to go across and make a bit of a noise while I take some of the bulk off here. Stand by. Okay, so to begin with, I get a fairly, let's get rid of that as well, fairly rough cut on the sander, bobbin, pillar sander, whatever it is, you know the thing. I'm going to get my sanding block out. Okay, so yeah, a little bit of a rough cut to begin with, so I'm just going to trim up all the bits so I can see where I'm at. And the next part of the thing is to work this down now to where I want it to be, but with kind of more precision, and that's why hand sanding becomes a good thing. So this, a lot of kind of experience has to come in here about where it likes to be held to get a nice flat 90-degree base, so the base is perpendicular to the vertical surface. And as always, I'm doing the sideways shuffle so I can keep my hands from flexing and not end up moving the work piece, so it doesn't end up kind of going all over the place. So I don't know how well you can see. So there we have it, starting to get there. So about nearly a millimetre still to go. It's leaning one way, so I'm going to counter that now with a bit of a lean in the other direction. This verticality thing is pretty much a experience thing. You just have to do it and reposition if you're going off target. And you have to sort of know, as you get closer to the correct height, or the correct height of the nut, you run out of readjustment room for sort of getting the angle better or more correct. So at the moment this is looking pretty good. Just kind of keeping a close eye. Now I could do with a little bit more pressure on the base side to even it up. Base end, I should say. And once I feel that's done, I kind of revert back to equal pressure and getting there bit by bit. Now at any point, if you're not experienced in doing this and you feel nervous, you can always fit that as is and work your way down with the through the slots. And I prefer, if at all possible, to try and avoid that, because the target for me, it's not always easy to do, but my target to begin with is to try and fit this new nut without any slot cutting, if at all possible, but it may not be possible to do that. It's better to end up with the correct first fret action and not risk over cutting or sanding too low by doing it this way. You know, if you need to stop and that's why I've left that sort of extra 1/10 of a mil, so that if I feel I'm on the mark now, I can just say, look, I'm going to do the 1/10 of a mil with the files. Like I say, I prefer to try and avoid doing that. But so I'm looking at this angle now, and we're a tiny bit now away from the vertical, so I'm going to lean forward a little tiny bit, and this last piece of sanding on the 80 grit should pretty much get me down to my 1/10 of a mil above target, and then I can finish it on the finer sanding paper here. So I'm practically on my mark. It's got a 90 degree. I can now just finish this on here. Doesn't really need much. How shiny or otherwise the underside is, as long as it's flat, it doesn't need to be perfected. So now we have, let's see, we should be a fraction off. So what we were on the original 706, here we have 711. That's pretty good. Before we had 673, we have 694. So we could afford a tiny little bit more, so I am going to do a tiny bit more, because that measurement just there, taken off the original one, is a very good guideline figure. If we just work to that, we should be in a safe zone. And it is possible to get there without having to cut the slots, but you've got to be a mixture of skilled and lucky. So we have 708 and 686, so we're still a whiff above on the base side. Let's see if we can just compensate for that here, and then we stop. So we have on the base side we have 683. We're a 1/10 of a mil over on the base. Treble side we're exactly on. So it's all there is just a tiny bit of adjustment on the base side. Now it's impossible to get it only on the base side when I'm doing that, so I'll get a little bit off the treble side too, but hopefully it will be within my 1/10 of a mil leeway. Come on, please go to 0. Thank you. So I expect we'll get 704 now, 703, and we got 671. That is pretty much as spot on as you're ever going to get. Okay, so we get the one we want, the tusk one. Lift our tailor back onto the table. You can see all right. Move these things out of the way. How are you looking? Yes. Okay. So when I was coming to do this, by the way, I had two choices of nut. I was going to originally fit a black one, which was the only one I could find to buy when I was buying parts for this. But in the end, it turned out I had the other one in stock, so that's not so bad. Okay, so this is very close fit. It feels very close. Now what I'm going to do is put these on, put this one on here and get it partly wound on as my basically dummy string. I honestly don't know. That really is the second tailor that's gone snap when I've undone the high E. So maybe they do something on it. That would be a peculiarity that I don't know about. But so now I'm noticing that having lowered the saddle now to its correct height, I noticed that it's a little bit looser in the slot than it was before. And that's sometimes common, you know, if you've got one, if you're not absolutely microscopically level, you'll have one end, you'll get a little bit thinner towards the top, and when you had a snug fit one way, it'll now be slightly different, but that's okay. It's the tiniest dab of glue will take care of that if necessary. It may not even be necessary. Okay, so the box for the nut can go. So what I'll do is I'll just make sure the nut's all sorted. We'll get that touched in with a bit of glue and set in position. When I'm happy with that, we'll come back and remove the neck and look at the shim. For your edification. Wow, this is super low. Now, sometimes I get caught out, and it may be I get caught out this time. Damn you. When the, like this has been like this from new. That is been holding, been sort of not pulled all the way up from new. Got way too much wire on there now, so let's just wrap this round and be done with it. So all of the time that guitar's been on the shop, hanging in the shop, it's had too much, the ball has been pushed all the way down to the bottom, just waiting to go bang like it just did there. Okay, let's get rid of this. So, yes, so you can, sometimes you can just get it where you think it's perfect, and then you realize that there's a tiny difference between the radius of the nut and the radius of the fingerboard, in which case you may have to still do a small adjustment with the saddle, with the nut files, which I hope not to do. Wow, that is so low. Now, if it feels too low, what I sometimes will do, to the tune of only a 20th of a mil, is maybe put a tiny bit of copper foil underneath, which is a very simple way of controlling, adding a tiny bit of extra marginal height rather than putting on bits of plastic or any other material. Like it. Okay, that is light as a feather. Beautiful. Right, so I'm happy with where that is. If I can get this piece of leftover stuff. I mean, it's a very low action, but just having a strum there, playing all right. And there's some dust. Don't ignore the dust on the fingerboard. So you can see very low action, very low down there too. Delightfully low. If I can make it zoom in on there. There you go. So, okay, so that's the setup done really. So what I'm just going to do now is I'm going to take these strings off again one more time. I might put them on again to keep the guitar under load for the joy of it until I get the new strings in. So let me just, we'll undo it now with the winder thing, and I'll go from side to side, so go the other way so we don't break it. And I'll do them side to side so that we keep the nut in the middle. And if it doesn't move around, then I won't move it, I won't glue it. It's no need to do it if it's firmly set in place. Okay, so let's have a more fun bit now where I look at the we'll look at the inside of it to show you what's involved. I've showed this on a couple of other videos, but since we're here, and in case you haven't seen it, this will be educational maybe. So interestingly, there are some other manufacturers who produce guitars with bolt-on necks. In fact, Martin has got two models. I think we will put a tiny bit of glue in later on when I come to fit the final strings, or maybe this time round. But yeah, Martin has made two guitars with bolt-on necks, and they came with allegedly came with a very cute and fairly high-tech looking shim system. Look at little kind of like SD cards almost. Very cute. Clip in these little shims that sort of clipped into the little holders like an SD card, feeling like you were changing the card in the video thing. So a customer and I were looking at, I'd recommended Taylor, and he'd done some research and found this Martin, that there were these two Martins, but one of them was a more affordable range. And so a tiny little dent here on the, it's a tiny sort of thing, but yeah, so we went looking for this particular model and ordered one because it just seemed like they'd caught onto the adjustability that Taylor was leading the way in, and what a great thing. So he ordered one, and in the time it took to arrive, a bit more research showed that in fact there was no availability of the shims required to make it work. Not only couldn't the customer get them, but even the approved service centres couldn't attain them. So it seemed like a whole good idea, scuppered down the tubes straight away. So let's have a look inside here with my thing. Ooh, look at this. Now I didn't use this like this before, so forgive me if it's terrible. Looky. So there we are. There's your two bolts with washers leading straight through, and in the top there, up there in the top, you can just make out a hex bolt, black hex bolt sticking out. So that's the fingerboard extension bolt, and different kind of size to the other ones, but this I'll show you how it works. So I've gently got my strings off to one side. I'm just going to move things out of the way so I've got room. Now typically at home I would stand this up on my carpety thing, but it's a higher bench here, so I won't do that. So I basically undo this with the hex key, which is one I keep in a bag specially for the right imperial size. And now you might think, what is the torque? What are the torque settings on this? And actually I go basically on what it feels like, because I don't have any small tool that would work to get a measurable torque setting. So I do it up back to where it was when I undid it. So now I'm going to do the bottom one, which I can feel. Wind it most of the way out so I can then do the next bit by hand. Now at this point I'm going to support the neck in case it wants to come off early and easily. After about 20 of these resets, I've had one that was basically glued or stuck. In fact, it was stuck because what it turned out is the heel was too wide and it had been pressed in to this is not a good place where I put those strings. Normally they're coiled up out the way. So there's the top one pair, and then here's the bottom one coming out. Now I'm holding the neck joint together at this point. If you're lucky at this point, the neck joint will come apart without any major kerfuffle, which it does there. Now I'm going to just put it on the hanger for a second so we can have a close-up look at what we've got in here. So there is our neck joint, and you can see straight away the two shims with the numbers on. We've got the 18 I put in there and the 12, and they're done in such a way that this one can only ever go in one way. So the number facing out, it goes into this receptacle there. That's flush with that, and this one can only go in one way because it lines up with the hole there, and you can see the number. So that there is flush there. So basically what happens is this end, the amount of shim lifts this end up or not, and this one gets thicker here, but it's always flush with that, and this is always flush. So this angle here is always perfectly flush, and then the whole thing kind of cants around or pivots around that flush face. So it's a brilliant system. But so there are other things to observe on this, and this is where I've had some interesting disagreements a little bit with Taylor, or not disagreements, but so you can see that a lot of this is you know, kind of ply construction here, this thicker area. Obviously it's thicker than the rest of the top, which is nice and thin, but you can see that it's not incomplete, but you know, it starts to look a little bit ropey under there, but that's fine. You know, it's not a big deal. The edges here are perfectly cut. As I said, the trouble I had before is that the fit of the neck on this particular guitar it was jammed in to there, so that when the neck came off, and it didn't really want to come off, but when it eventually came off, it pulled a load of fibers up, and it caused a splintering of the finish. It was a gloss finish as well, so it caused a splintering of the finish there. And I was able to repair it after, you know, it took quite a while to do it right. Anyway, but it's not ideal, and so you have to really watch out. And the kind of strategies they advise for when you do come across that sort of problem, I'm not sure they would have helped me, to be honest. It was about tapping it, it was about wiggling it. Well, you know, if you can wiggle it, it's about to come off anyway. So what I also discovered that Taylor does is when it makes these joints, I guess what it does is I presume by default it uses a couple of different soft putties, and it will, for example, it'll take a lighter colour putty and it will run it all the way around this little edge here, ready for when it presses the neck in. and then the same for with the bottom down here, it'll do it with a darker putty, and then the neck goes on and you get some squeeze out, and then I guess they clean up once the bolts are in place. But that kind of seals up any tiny gap. However, in my experience of working on these recently, is I found that the putty pulls up, the putty on the other faces can pull up shards of this finish. I've had a chunk of the neck, sorry, it's not what I call it. I've had bits of this come out, and you can see, look, you can see that that's where it's hard, and so and in going hard, it forms a kind of glue. So there's an issue. So we've got a light bit, so there's a bit of putty that sort of tries to fill the little gap there, then it goes to the top colour, and then it goes down here to the dark colour. So they use 3 different putties, and there's some there just filling the gap. Now it's a tricky one, because when you then look at what you've got the neck with this, it's like the grime. Now this isn't actually that easy to get off all in one go, and the question is, when you put this back on, if you can see the angle here has a particular, oh no, you can't, I'm so sorry, I'm really not concentrating on the camera work. So you can see the angle here, there we go, the angle, it's thin down there, and it thickens as we go down here. So there's clearly an angle, and that angle will change now we've put a different shim in there. So what we'll get is probably a little gap. So you can either, and I think this is what Taylor thinks that everyone's going to do, you can either take off all this crusty putty, which frankly I don't know how cooperative that's going to be without causing other problems. I mean, it's a little bit on the hard side. So if you take off this, so I've decided on doing these. I'm not going to reinstall putty. I don't mind taking it off, but the tiny gaps that open up are, they're no problem they don't make any playability issues, because they're just cosmetic. And I got Taylor to state that quite clearly, or I put it to them, this is just a cosmetic thing, isn't it? And they said yes, it's just a final cosmetic touch. So there's no structural issue about putting this back together again without any more putty on. And quite frankly, for now, I would prefer to, if necessary, perhaps take off the putty so there isn't any jammed getting in the way, but I don't really feel terribly moved to add more and create potentially more adhesive kind of areas that can pull up wood on the inside of the pocket there. So what you get is, when you take off this putty, then you may, as I did earlier on, just by actually even before we took the putty off, when you reconnect the neck, you just see the small tiny gap, but it is minuscule, and if I hadn't mentioned it now, Ian I'm certain wouldn't have noticed it. So whether at some point I will have a go at refitting or reinstalling putty as well. So the way it's going to work is that I now can hold it back together again, and I can get my first one, and holding it together I can just gently find, depending on whatever way up it suits me, find the in slot for this, and working blind, get that in a fair amount of the way, as far as it will go with the fingers, and then do the same for the bottom one. And the beauty of this is that it is a nice fit, and you really won't, as long as the shim pair is correct, separated by the 6, so the heel shim is always 6 greater than, and even when it's down to negative numbers, it's still, so if we start with, let's say the heel shim is negative -2, take 6 away from -2 and you end up with -8. So your -2 heel shim is partnered with a -8 extension shim. So it's just working with minus numbers, that's all. Okay, so I'm now putting those on at sort of hand tightness, and then finally on goes the little hex bolt. And I will zoom in so you can see the result of changing the shim and removing the old putty. I mean, the gap would show up, by the way, whether you remove the old putty or not, because the point is the gap, it's the shim that creates the new larger gap, or the different alignment. So whether you've got the putty in there or not, it still won't show. Sorry, it still won't hide the gap. The old putty won't hide the gap. So this is working blind still. I'm not getting a very good bite of this hex key. Now I got it. Okay. Okay, so that's the neck reattached. That's all there is to it. And then looking up close, let's see what we can see. See that? That's just a hint of the original putty on the top section, which I could have removed as well. And then you can just see a little bit. And what you're seeing actually is the grime or the rime. It would probably be better to have pulled that off. But it's a tiny. I mean, we are zoomed in, so if you're out here, you would barely see it. Technically, yes, I could probably get some putty and look at it, but it adds a cost because there's a load of material. I mean, it's not cheap. And it's interesting. I'm looking at any flexibility in this, because this is a perfect fit, and there is a little bit of flexibility, but I guess that's in the top as much as anywhere else. But we are as done up as we're ever going to be. Okay, so that's a little tour inside of there. Like I said, if probably never would have looked or seen or made any particular comment on that. Don't know what you can see now. Any comment on the gap? I just wonder if this is on. Yeah, this is a little tiny bit on the end there. It's not really the best place to take it off. But it could be done with. I think working with a little plastic edge of a pickup is probably pick is probably just as good as anything. But yeah, I mean, it's bound to in realigning the angle, you will get a slightly different space opening up. It's bound to. The geometry is changing, and it has to show up as different. Yeah, I think the thing that sort of stands out more than anything is the leftover stuff. So it does probably make more sense to remove the original, if anything. It depends on how big the adjustment is. If it's very, very small, then it's not going to be hardly noticeable. Anyway, yeah, maybe we'll see about getting some more putty in. But once you've got the original putty out of the way, you don't see the stripe now. It's just like a little engineering gap, and it doesn't stand out very much at all. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put a tiny touch of glue onto this here nut, and wherever it's gone, there it's gone, and we'll get that bedded down on there. This one should be pretty simple just to put it in. I don't need, it's not like it has to be forced down with any strings, so I can just hold it down for a second or two until it's set. As always, the glue has sealed itself up as it hardens and tries to turn into a glue monster. So we have to resort to some pretty hefty measures to get the top off. It's almost always a waste of money, these pots of glue. They're good quality glue, but my God, it won't last. I won't get the full pot's worth of use out of it, because it's just going to it's going to go hard and become unworkable before I use it all. Okay, so there we are. I'm just getting that into place there, as flush as I can be. There we go. Press that there for a second. Should be fine. Make sure it's flush, beautifully fitted. It's very satisfying when you do get the nut shaped, and that way of doing it that I showed, of starting with the reference measurement of the original, and then working down until your nut is just the right size and just fitting, and as you go in sort of 100th of a millimeter by 100th of a millimeter until it just fits in. It's very satisfying, and it's a nice snug fit, and you know you won't have any problems. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this E and the A string out of the way, and I'm going to fit the D string first, just in case there is any pull to one side. I'll try and keep the forces all in the middle, so that we don't tug the nut in the wrong direction. This is the wrong string, so let's not use that one. Let's use the correct one, which I thought was a bit short all of a sudden. Okay. Noise. So the other thing about putting an extremely light amount of glue on there is that, let's say for example I play this for a couple of hours and I decide that I want that extra tiny 20th of a millimeter lift on the nut. I just want to put a couple of sheets of self-adhesive foil under there. Then the lighter the fixing with glue, the more likely it is I'll be able to get the nut off without any issues. So it's important. So these strings now are holding down the nut in place, and I can now attach the remaining strings, fit the remaining strings. And then this one will go home, and the final part will be fitting the new strings, but that will be off camera really. There's nothing remarkable about that. I mean, it'll basically be like this, only with brand new strings rather than these that came from the factory, I believe, or from the shop. So there's an interesting sort of little tale behind this. I haven't got the emails in front of me, so I hope I don't misrepresent it for Ian's sake, but he, when he got this guitar, he felt the action was too high, and he either contacted him or took it back to where he bought it from, and they took it in. I think they took it in, but they said it was a humidity problem, and apparently did something to do, maybe dehumidify it or something. And when he got it back, he said he thought it was improved, but it still wasn't right. So hence it's come here. But I just thought it's interesting that I think sometimes the vendor, I don't know, panics isn't maybe the kind word, but it's like it's an easy attribution to say, oh, it's humidity problem in some way, because there's always this little feeling that you can kind of blame, this is the wrong side of the darn thing, it's almost as if you can blame the customer you know, like, well, your house is probably damp, and therefore, or at least it's something that the customer can feel unsure about, whether maybe it was something they did, or you know, they don't know. But I don't think it was. I don't think the issue had anything to do with humidity. I think it was to do with the fact that it was, you know, set this way from the beginning. And what I think I absolutely don't just think. What the vendor should have done was what I've done, which is shim it, you know, the correct way with the proper factory shims. But they didn't, so. Let's pretend he. Lovely. Right, I'm going to call that done, and we'll put that back in its case, and we'll take it home and wait for the new strings. They probably arrived this evening, but they weren't there before I came out. So I'm happy. We've got the new tusk nut, we've got the radius, we've got the the neck reset. One thing I'll just check on here is, yeah, we've got a little bit of relief, but it's very flat. Okay, that's a gorgeously low action. That'll be the easiest electric guitar that Ian's ever played, the acoustic guitar he's ever played, and that's how it can be. And you know, while people like Taylor say, well, you know, our target action or our spec action is much higher than that, and it certainly is. But while your basics of your guitar are so good that they can tolerate a lower action, and people seem to want a lower action, I think insisting on a higher action as a sort of universal thing is not so good. Anyway, there we have it. I'm going to call that quits. Thanks for watching. I hope there was something interesting in there for those of you who are interested in the Taylor shim. When I criticize or make any observations, don't get me wrong, I think Taylor guitars are great. I recommend them, not because they pay me to recommend them, but I recommend them because I like the way they sound and play, and if I can keep this thing at this sort of action for another 10 years, I've seen enough of all the other kinds of acoustics where you haven't got a hope in hell of doing that, because as soon as they start to go, you are stuck with taking the saddle down and ultimately doing a neck reset. That's your only way to go. And I've got to say, that's a pretty depressing situation to be in. So I think Taylor's done a great thing in building in this very precise, accurate shim, bolt-on neck and shim system. So I really do think that this will give you, I can't say guitar for life unless we put it to the test one of these days within the 12-year. I think unfortunately the warranty only refers or relates to the original buyer, so I'm not entirely sure. So if you buy the second hand and you would like it kind of re-engineered here so you can restart the shim kind of climbing, I think you may be out of luck. But if you're the original owner, it's still a fantastic thing to be able to say, look, 10 years from now I've run out of adjustment with my 30 shim, and if Taylor will take it back in and recut, re-engineer the joint here so you can start again with the shims and do all those adjustments, then absolutely good. Now, I mean, I've seen videos recently where people like Jerry Rosa, is it? Rosa String Works, is, you know, changing, pulling off bridges from Taylors and so on and so forth. And I've seen somebody else repairing one that's cracked here. Truth is, you know, a bridge like this on this type of guitar will break as much or as little as anyone else's bridge will break. You know, it's not Taylor's fault if the bridge goes here. Particularly, it's a pretty fundamental flaw in the overall strength versus tone battle, which strength always loses and tone wins. So you know, any and all acoustic guitars end up with problems around the bridge. So I don't think it's fair to single Taylor out for any criticism of that. But where Taylor does score, obviously, as I say, is this adjustability. And to be honest, it's one of the only guitars that I could, if I were to give Ian this setup on another guitar, say he'd bought a £600 Tanglewood, for example. Of course, the only way I would have achieved that at all would have been via the saddle, and he now might have a nice playing action, but it would be at the cost of the break angle of the strings over the saddle. And as you can see here, because we're still working with the original saddle height from the factory, we're still well within, you know, there's no risk at all. And of course, with the shim system, there's no, I will never touch that saddle until we've run out of, we've run out of 30s, and you know, it's not registered to me, and I can't get Taylor to rework the joint here. So that's the only time I will adjust this. There may be a tiny thing where I make a small adjustment to reduce one side in relation to the other, and that's easier done via the saddle than it is. Your shim can't do that. The shim is a universal or a gross movement. But for changing the balance, you do it via the saddle. But that would be such a small adjustment, it would make very little difference to the break angle over the strings over the saddle. Anyway, that's enough. Hope you found it interesting. Thanks for watching, Ian. I hope you enjoyed playing it. And I don't know what that was I just dropped, but I will see you soon.